It's nice and chill. I'm very excited.
What is that? Like 68-ish
Something like that.
Fahrenheit, probably.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's nice temperate weather, but it's overcast because of all the fires. All right, here we go. And here we are for another episode of Dualistic Unity Raw. This is going to be a fun day because we've got this episode of Dualistic Unity Raw, and then we're going to do another live stream later on today because we're not filming a classic episode. Instead, we're just kind of going to shoot the shit as we prepare for our Vermont retreat. I'm very excited about this mini retreat. I think more than anything, just because of the location. The location just seems really dope. Like there's a pond there. There are some benches beside the pond. There's a nice deck. There's a hot tub. There's a pool table inside, a massive main room with like a fireplace. And we're going to be up on a mountain. It's the end of August. It might get a little chilly at night. So who knows? There might be a fire in our immediate future. It's really hard to tell, but there are so many really, really cool people coming. The guest list for this one is just amazing. It always is, but these are like there are two people coming to this mini retreat who have been to a retreat before. That's it. The rest of them are all newcomers to a mini retreat. So this is going to be such an exciting event. The last retreat that we had in Colorado was almost like a reunion. A lot of people who had been to previous events coming to that event, and one new person. This one, it's mostly new people. So that's very exciting. And then, of course, we are also leading up to the Netherlands retreat that is coming up in November. That's going to be just an incredible event. 34 guests. 34 community members, all in the state of mind of just getting out of their own way, shooting the breeze with one another, talking about their journeys, sharing their insights, just recognizing that we're all in this together with people who also recognize that we're all in this together. That alone is exciting to me because each and every time we've had one of these retreats or one of these mini retreats, it's fucking magical, man. Like it's so cool to be able to sit and just be and not have anybody around you that's thinking they should be something, because everybody around you is trying very hard, or at least working on not trying very hard, and they're just being themselves. And so it's so easy, it's effortless, and everything just falls into line. And the only way I can describe it is magical. So 34 people all doing that in a country I've never been to. So the uncertainty is going to be dialed like right up. It's going to be just fantastic. You're going to see a very excited, happy Ray who's wandering around, just happy to meet everyone and talk to everyone. And yeah, I'm stoked. This is going to be a fun adventure, man. But yeah, Vermont. Whew.
Oh yeah, I'm fucking pumped. It's gonna be just a great time, and that environment of being in a spot where people aren't expecting anything of anyone, trying to be anything or see anything in anyone, actually actively questioning all the things that they think they should try to be, and even just thinking about yourself. Like, holy fucking Christ. Whenever, like, that's what was kind of hitting me today, was just anytime I'm in some sort of pit or rut or lull or whatever, I'm just thinking about myself a bunch. That's all it is. Like, it's so fucking basic and simple and straightforward, and it doesn't seem like that at the time. There's all of these complexities and things happening and things going on and ins and outs and blah 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 blah. But it's just making assumptions about yourself, thinking about your fucking self, and it's so. And it's not to say that it's just this simple thing. Oh, just stop thinking about yourself. But in a sense, it kind of is. We just have all of these habitual patterns, and I've gotten so used to doing it over the years. Like, I've built up so many habits surrounding thinking about myself as a means of, I don't know, staying safe. Like, there seems to be some convoluted payoff that I must be buying into, that I think it's worthwhile, but really it is just thinking about yourself when you're overly caught up in worry, concern, fear, trying to be something, trying to be something else other than what you are. Like, just the idea that you can show up to something and just be you, and that's enough, and whatever comes out, whatever happens, however it goes, is you being you, and you don't have to bring this weight into every situation of trying to be something for someone else. Like there's no one else to be something for other than you. And when you start prioritizing your experience for you without thinking about what the fuck that means, just doing it, just stepping into things and being willing to find out and see what happens instead of having this curated idea of how it should go. And the thought of being something else, I should have done this a little bit differently, should have done that a little bit differently, should be doing this a little bit better or differently, or anything, be more like this person, more like that person, more of this. Like even in just moment to moment situations, the thought of being something else or doing something else or acting differently is the weight. Like that idea that I know that I should be something else or should be doing something differently than I am, that the me that I am right now isn't enough, isn't correct, isn't right. And it all boils down to thinking about yourself so much. Like just maintaining this perpetual sort of stress, weight, desire, intention to be something other than just what you are, which is all you have to do. Like you can just do that, but I'm so used to not doing that it seems different to do it. Like it seems jarring to just be willing to step into things despite it being what I've been doing the whole time. Like it is what I've done my whole life. And it's just been this subtle concern that I'm doing something incorrectly or I should be doing something differently that's gotten in the way despite me being it the whole time. Like that's the thing, is it's not a change in not thinking about yourself so that you become different than you are. It's like this you that you've always been, that you've always had concern about and thought that you should be different is it. Like that's it right there. That's always been it the whole time. And then so you can keep going without the hesitancy, without the concern, without so much stress, without so much fear or worry about how something may go or how you may be perceived or how you may be looked at or how you may fucking look at yourself. Because that's all it is just your judgment of yourself, your thought that you're not enough, your thought that you should be different. It isn't anyone else's that you're trying to work through or overcome. It's just letting go of your own fucking certainty, the certainty that you should be doing something differently or better at something than you are, or expressing something differently, or being more free or have less stress. Even that, like the degree of stress that you experience, like that is what it is. Like the thought that you should be stress free or you should sound more free or you should be more open or you shouldn't be hesitant about things. Like even those you can let go of because that's a component of it. And as that idea that they shouldn't be happening gets let go of, they start to subside naturally because it's that idea that they should be different that's perpetuating all of those things. But you don't have to maintain this constant thought of yourself and the fear of things just completely breaking down and falling apart if I don't constantly maintain this perception of how I'm doing at all times. It's like on the side. It's like, things are happening and then it's like, oh, but how is this going? How is that going? How did that go? How will this go? Like you don't need that shit. It's still going to happen. It's still going to play out and you're actually going to be far more involved in the situation, in the experience, when you're not maintaining that sort of side idea of 10, 20, 50, 80% of your focus on how it's going how you're doing, because you can't even know that. So you keep grinding up against this thought. I keep grinding up against this thought of how things are going, how I'm doing, how I'm acting. That only gets in the way of me acting as I am, not appropriately, not correctly, not the right way, just acting and continuing to act. There is no appropriate way to act. There's no correct way to act. There's no right way to act. Like these barometers are fucking bullshit. They don't exist anywhere except the one, except for you and your maintenance through your desire for certainty, through my desire for certainty. But it just so much of it comes down to constantly thinking about this fictitious fucking bundling of ideas that you think you are that have nothing to do with the reality of what you are.
Well, that's kind of the ultimate false certainty. I'm certain I shouldn't feel like this. That's really it, right? Because I mean, that's why we're thinking about it, trying to change it instead of just sitting in it. Because I mean, you can say this now with a certain degree more clarity that, just thinking about myself. And it was more difficult for you to do that previously because, frankly, you wanted to think about yourself. And the alternative was just dealing with all of the reasons that you do want to think about yourself, which is what you've done in the last several months. A lot of the backtracking you've done in your memory was a lot of, oh, wow, I started thinking of myself back then. That's when I developed this tendency of thinking about myself. And these are the reasons why. And you start realizing exactly how long you've been building this fiction over time. But it's because you actually managed to sit in it and allow that to unpack, right? You just sat in what you were. And all of the reasons that you weren't being that had to play out. All the feelings that went with that had to play out. And then once you let it do that, you're just back to where you are because you never left that. But there's less avoidance. Because that's what the false certainty is. That's what the thinking is. It's avoidance. It's avoidance of who I am now. That's all it is. And there's a good reason for it, right? Because we don't think we're enough. Why don't we think we're enough? Well, a lot of reasons. Identity, all of that stuff, everything that we've been talking about. But it's just that the alternative to thinking about my life is living it. And if I can't find a way to let go of my preferences, if I can't find a way to make the most of this moment, if I can't make sense of why I'm experiencing what I'm experiencing right now, I immediately think, oh shit, something's wrong. Right. And it's just because I always want to understand. I'm afraid. I want to understand. I want to feel like I know where I'm going. Right. I want to feel like I know who I am. I want to feel like I know how people see me. All of it just comes down to that false certainty, that avoidance of, right, but I don't know any of that. And this is how it feels. This is how uncertainty feels. This is it. And we're like, but wait, there could be certainty. How about this? And that's more or less it. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just taking it too seriously. It's just getting caught up in it.
Yeah, and oh man, it's just so interesting how, like, going through certain things, like, I think I can know what I'm even going through. Like, I think I can know where I'm at now relative to where I've been at. And it's that fucking even idea that I could know that. Like right now, I feel like there's a part of me that's backtracked a ton. And that's just an assumption that I'm making to perpetuate this continued process of whatever the fuck it is. Like, I don't know what it is. It's not something specific that's happening to me. And yet I see along the way the benefits of sort of digging back into certain feelings and experiences. But there's a part that's like, I'm so hyper aware of certain habits and patterns and reasons for doing things and reasons that I've done things in the past that I'm seeing them for what they are so that I'm not doing them as much anymore. But that can be uncomfortable as shit.
At least you're not calling them intrusive thoughts.
Because
That's what they are. Think about it. That's the difference in perspective, right? Your brain's always producing all these considerations, right? But if you're running from them, if you don't look at them, they're intrusive thoughts. Otherwise, they're just what you are. They're just intelligence in motion. And it's really important not to panic through that. It can feel really intense when you're not used to the experience, when you're used to dulling down everything that you feel and experience. Suddenly getting the full deal is a lot, but it's not more than you can take. It's just perceptually more than you can take. It's like the feeling of being overwhelmed. That's largely due to your perception that you're not enough to deal with it. If you were to let go of that perception, the feeling of being overwhelmed would go away.
yeah, because it does. Like when that shifts. And yeah, like that's a good way of putting it, because they're not intrusive thoughts. Like I don't see them in that way at all. And that's almost another tactic of avoiding certain things. It's like, oh, here's a potential consideration. Oh, I don't like this one. It makes me uncomfortable. Therefore, it's intrusive. Therefore, I'm gonna run from it, or at least, suppress it, as opposed to looking at it. And now I'm just looking at everything without the judgment that I would typically have about it, which leads to just an avoidance. It's like, oh, I don't like that. And now it's like, yeah, that is a potential consideration. That is maybe a reason that I do something. And then, the overwhelm comes when I think that it means something about me or has meant something about me. And it's like fucking can shake the shit out of you, but I'm not running from it. I'm being shaken and being willing to be shaken, kind of, and not putting it on other things. And maybe that was a tactic I've used in the past when certain experiences like this have come up, is putting it on something else, or coming up with a way. It's like, oh, I'm feeling a certain way. Just gotta meditate more. Just gotta get more structure, build more routine, build more certainty. Work out more, exercise more. Not be on my phone as much. Like all of these things that they're not bad things at all, but they are means of avoiding certain feelings or experiences. Like they're not cures, like cutting down phone time. Even something like that, like it doesn't fix the underlying thing. Exercising more. It's not a cure, it's a band-aid. Like we push these things as if they're cures, as if they're things that overcome this underlying perception that I'm not enough. And they're not. They're means of avoiding. And oh, just build more structure. Just implement a 30-minute meditation every morning. Like that's not a cure. It's not a fix. And so I'm realizing that none of these things are cures. So I'm not running to them or attaching to them, but I'm just constantly left with my fucking self, like with myself in that uncertainty without reaching for something. And it's like, holy fuck. So it's both the recognition that I don't need those things, but it's also on me here and now making assumptions about certain things that are unnecessary to do. And that's like the experience of freedom and actually being with yourself as yourself. And then you can, do all the things that maybe at one point you used as tactics of avoidance, but it's not as a way of avoiding something. Like oh my God, we use all of like so many fucking things, so many things that are pushed by so many smart people. Like, oh yeah, these three things, just do these and then you'll be good. And they're just like suppressants. That's what they are, especially, the obvious ones, something like alcohol is a massive suppressant avoidance tactic, but all the habits that we deem as beneficial, positive habits are also suppressants. And that's a lot to take in. that realization that all of those things, all of the healthy habits are mechanisms of avoidance as well to some degree. And like when you see that, like I don't have the inclination to run towards anything else or use anything to avoid, but it doesn't mean that it's not uncomfortable to not attach to those things. But that's working through it, I guess.
It's uncomfortable because you haven't been doing it. Right. Like that's more or less it. It's just contrast. After a while, you're just like you start to recognize like there's points of discomfort either way. Like you can deal with the discomfort of not really having anything you can attach to as absolute truth. Or you can attach to things as absolute truth and deal with the discomfort when they're not. It's one way or another. There's a trade. It really just comes down to recognizing that it's you in each and every moment, and looking at the considerations. You have an opportunity to act in a certain way that will change what you're dealing with from moment to moment. So here's a perfect example. My husband asked me why I'm so sensitive yesterday and what's wrong with me. It's a terrible way to ask. Anyway, because of the way I was responding to something. I don't know the context here, so this is important. I felt so small and insecure, and I mistakenly said that he is what's wrong because I felt attacked and like something was wrong with me. It was kind of leading in that direction. Still carrying the experience and ideas of who I am today. Any advice? Well, recognizing why you felt small and insecure, which you've already done. You even said it here. I'm just focusing on my experience too much. You're focusing too much on your idea of yourself. If you feel small and insecure, it's because of that idea of yourself. And of course, what's wrong with you isn't a great way to start, but immediately thinking, well, nothing is a good way to get into that. Now, this is lingering into today. And so the only reason I got into this is because, see, you know all this. You're asking the question, you have all these considerations, you know exactly, what happened, what led to it, and everything else. And now it's just, well, how do I deal with it? Well, how is it going to stick? How is it going to stick? And that's really the question. So for me, my first inclination would be to go and tell your husband, hey, you know, I was thinking about myself yesterday when you were talking to me, and it felt like I was being attacked mostly because I was thinking about myself. Had nothing to do with you, or and that's another challenge is just letting it go because it's still on your response, right? And that's it. Just say something you wouldn't ordinarily say. I let it get to me. And it's because I was thinking about myself. I just wanted you to know there's no apology there. You're just recognizing it, but you're bringing it out as a form of expression. You're talking about it in the same way you're talking about it here in the comment section, but you're talking about it in a moment of discomfort where you actually have to face that thing and admit to yourself, this is what you did without apology. It's just what you did. It's not that there aren't contributing factors. It's not like he isn't part of the conversation as well, right? But that's not blame. That's recognition. You can recognize what you've done. You can address what you've done. You can talk about what you've done without it needing to be a point of blame or judgment. Right. And you don't have to talk to others about it. I want to make that clear. You can just go through it yourself. But the point is to go through it. The point is to go through it. And if there is a situation in front of you where like, oh God, I could just be honest and it would change the outcome of this, but it would be really uncomfortable to do that, just do it. Because that's what you're going to remember. That's what's going to stick. Taking the easy way out of every situation, unfortunately, doesn't teach you anything about how to deal with that situation next time.
Yeah, being willing to just have an honest conversation. A lot of times the thought of doing something like that is uncomfortable, but it's only because we think we know how it's going to be received and taken and looked at and where it's going to go. And we never really do. And oftentimes that's where the big shifts happen. And the underlying stuff that keeps bubbling up is oftentimes faced just through being open and honest about something. And usually when you talk to someone about it, they can relate because everyone goes through things like that, having responses when we're feeling, down or stressed or thinking about ourselves too much. And the willingness to be open with someone about that and just have the conversation itself, like not even with any desire for it to necessarily go anywhere, but just the opening up in and of itself oftentimes leads to things that you couldn't possibly imagine or fathom. And there may be other things, involved in that situation that come up just because you're willing to initiate it by being open and honest and speak on something that, you're feeling in yourself. And
Without judgment.
yeah.
It's the without judgment. You can have a conversation about what you're doing without judging yourself for it. It doesn't feel like we can do that, but we can, right? Like we can look at what we've done in honesty, take accountability, and not judge ourselves for it. Because what's the point of judging yourself for it if you're taking accountability? Is beating yourself up somehow going to drill the lesson in more than accountability? Doesn't do a fucking thing. If anything, it makes it harder to learn. It makes it harder to want to be accountable if accountability goes with self-judgment, doesn't it? You'd actually start to avoid being accountable because you always toss judgment in with it. They're not the same thing. They don't have to go hand in hand. You can just be accountable, learn, change, adapt, and continue on without ever thinking that it has anything to do with your value or how good or bad you are. You've already changed. What more do you want from yourself?
Yeah, fuck. How often I can use self-judgment as an avoidance tactic, right? Like, Jesus Christ. And it's like an easy out in a sense, in a way. Like, cause it isn't, it's like a different type of discomfort. It's a familiar discomfort, judging myself, as opposed to looking at what happened or what is going on with some degree of clarity without the need for self-judgment. Like, I run back to that as opposed to just like, stop thinking about yourself. You don't know what the fuck is going on here. So it's really hard to judge yourself. You don't know what the fuck is going on. Like, it's really difficult to be sure about how you're doing. And there has to be degrees of certainty in order to judge yourself. And so if you're willing to just come back to like, I don't know what the fuck's happening. I don't know what the fuck is happening. And so how could I possibly be sure of how I'm doing, of what I'm dealing with, of what I'm going through, of what the fuck is happening right now? But there are recognitions of things that are happening. And if I settle upon a certainty about myself and how I'm doing, it's like, that's the focus. That's where it all is. And there's all this other shit going on. It's like, I can't see any of that because I'm fucking staring at this made up assumption about my progress or how I'm doing. Like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on. And how many times do I have to go through something like this where I realize, holy fuck, that was utterly necessary. That actually had a lot of benefit to it. I was actually able to speak about this process of going through something and talk through it and learn new ways of fucking viewing something, or let go of old patterns because I'm not running back to the ones that I used to use as a means of avoidance, and actually looking at the things that I'm doing without avoiding. And fucking, got a podcast, and about 10 minutes ago, I was wondering what the fuck I'm even doing with a podcast and with social media and making videos and talking about things. But it's the going through things and being open and fucking talking about going through them and working through them and talking about it. Cause like, you don't do any fucking good to anyone if you don't go through shit from time to time. Like, to think that it's better for yourself, for anyone, to just be rid of the discomfort, the concern, the shit that you go through, it's a fucking joke. Like, what the fuck am I thinking that I shouldn't be going through anything ever anymore? And even the depths, and when it feels like a pit of hell and shit, it's like, that's where everything comes from. is the willingness to look at that, because that's where I'm at. It's like me, all of me is at this. So you don't do anyone any fucking good to think that you've moved past certain things. You don't do anyone any good. But at the same time, if you can realize that you don't have to focus on it, it doesn't have to be your entire fucking purview, this idea of you, this assumption. You can still go through things and realize that, talk about it, discuss, like, yeah, it's fucking uncomfortable. Yeah, I've woke up the last couple weeks just with just whirlwinds of concern and fear and worry and all this bullshit focused on myself. But if all of that just cleared and was gone, it's like, that's not what it's about. It's not about getting to a spot in which those things don't happen anymore. You don't see that stuff from time to time. You don't get a glimpse of fucking hell or pits or shit. It's like, so much of this has been the thought that I shouldn't be going through this stuff anymore. Like, I shouldn't be dealing with these things anymore. That's bullshit. That's fucking bullshit to think that I shouldn't be going through. Oh, I've overcome this stuff. I'm better than that. Oh God. Oh, it's so much assumption about what this experience should be. It's like, there is no should. Like, that hits on so many different levels, from like what you're immediately going through to what you're overarchingly going through. But I can't even fucking know what I'm going through. I don't even know what's going on right now. I don't know what's happening. So how can I even settle upon an adequate judgment of how it's happening if I don't even know what is happening? How can I know that? It's just an assumption, just to feel a little bit better about that recognition that I don't know. I just don't know. And I'm feeling things, absolutely. I'm feeling very intense things all the time. I don't know what they are, though. I don't know what it is. I don't know. I can't adequately describe it, so I'll just pin it on something. Oh, it's this. I'm dealing with this, going through this, working on this, working through this, letting go of this, letting go of that. It's like, I don't know. What a joke to think that I could know. And then all the weight that comes from the assumption that I do know, and the thought of what I should be feeling or experiencing, this assumption that there is a spot in which, I should be feeling this over these things. This would be a better spot than this. Says who? Says fucking who? Besides me and my assumptions and my thoughts about, yeah, just about myself and yeah. It's funny.
If you can find the humor in it, yeah, absolutely. But again, that's a choice too, right? It just, this is kind of it. Is when you break it all down, you're just left with you and your, I guess, chosen angle on life at any given point, right? And that's all there really is. Like, I think the mistake is to think that if you're looking at one angle, the other angles aren't happening. Like, just because you aren't getting all stressed out doesn't mean that you're not processing the things that stress you out. Just because you're not getting swept up in emotion doesn't mean you're not feeling and processing those emotions. I mean, we tend to think that because we don't allow ourselves to process them. But after a while, you can feel the wind without thinking it's going to knock you off your feet every time. But if every time you feel a breeze, you panic, well, you're going to have a different experience of the wind. And the same is true for emotions. Like, emotions are what they are. You're going to feel them. The problem is that we tend to label them, put an idea on them. Where's that coming from? And then we immediately tie it to the narrative. And then we have to deal with all of that part of the narrative. But until we do that, it's just the feeling that we're having. Right. And so as long as we don't go, why is this happening? Our mind automatically processes all the reasons why. Like, that's where all these insights come from. Like, your intelligence is always processing. It's always processing. It's always moving along with all the stuff that's come before it, right? And so the whole point is just to feel it, stop immediately going, it's because of this, and then giving yourself something to chew on. And you will find yourself remarkably free and full of insight and full of emotion and empathy and all that stuff. I'm an emotional motherfucker, right? You just wouldn't know it. Why? Well, because I've felt my emotions a lot and fully. I've had moments where I've just wept unapologetically. And there's nothing wrong with any of that, but I can feel those emotions now without necessarily letting them overwhelm me, without being overwhelmed by them. They're still there, right? And that's important to have them there, not to dull them down by thinking about yourself. Because that's what it is. While you're like, I'm going to solve this emotion, really all you're doing is trying to run from it. You're trying to intellectualize it. You're trying to conceptualize it. You're trying to make it something that it's not. And this is something that we start doing really early on. My daughter was going through this recently, just feeling all of the emotions that go with being a 15-year-old girl at the time. And she's like, it's a lot. I'm like, it is a lot. And that's maturity. Maturity is being able to feel everything that you are without running from it. Right? It's just being responsible or accountable. And I find that really interesting because, again, this goes back into but I want to think about myself. So if I wasn't doing it up until now, therefore I was doing something wrong before. It's like, you're still doing it. Like, you're still thinking about yourself. And that's not to say that if you stop, all of your problems are going to go away. It's to say that you're going to stop looking at them as problems.
Exactly. And even, with certain emotions, like I'm just, yeah, kind of realizing it as you're saying it now, that I felt like if I'm experiencing or feeling a certain emotion, if I don't fully feel it, look at it, label it, blah, 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 that I'm avoiding it. But really, if I do those things, I'm avoiding here and now. I'm avoiding right now through labeling it. And then as I think it means
You're
something about,
changing it.
yeah. Yeah. I'll like allowing it to continue to change and process as soon as I feel like, oh, I have to fully feel this, let it out, release it, label it, know what it is. It's like that's not allowing it to continue. It's like I gotta pin this down right here and like catch it, like fucking trying to catch a fish in a river, instead of just letting it. I don't know how to finish that now. Letting it swim into your net or something. I don't know. It's not about catching fish, but yeah. And then it's like as soon as I think it means something about me, I'm avoiding me continuing to play out. Like I feel like I have to label these things and say what they are and figure them out as a means of avoiding reality, as a means of avoiding myself. I got to figure out what I am in order to continue to avoid me. And like there's all these avoidance tactics of just being where I'm at, experiencing life, like experiencing myself here and now. Like there's so many ways of avoiding that and thinking that something means something about me, thinking that I have to know what something is. I've always felt like if I don't do that, then I'm avoiding it. Oh, avoiding your emotions. Don't avoid your emotions. Don't suppress your emotions. But as you said, like they're going to keep processing. Like you don't have to sit on them and stare at them and just be like, this is something that I'm dealing with and working through and blah, blah, blah. Like it's going to keep going. And even the assumption that it's coming from you, this is something that I'm dealing with, I'm going through. It's like, this is something passing through you. This is something that isn't necessarily, I mean, in one sense, it is all stemming from you, but it's not like a Andrew specific thing always. Like the experiences that we go through are all encompassing. And so to think that I have to look at it and focus it and label it kind of has this underlying assumption that it's just me in silos, separate from everything else, separate from reality, separate from people, separate from the rest of me. And as I look at it, and it's like, this is my burden to bear. It's like it's all of me's thing, and looking at it, labeling it, trying to figure it out is just stagnating that processing of collective healing or working through or whatever it is, and thinking it means something about me, thinking about myself in connection to it is absolutely stagnating that processing, is absolutely cutting down on the ability for it to continue to process and be worked through, because you don't know what's happening. You don't know the whole everything behind everything that you're dealing with and going through. You don't fucking know. So how could you settle upon an adequate idea of what it is so that you can then deal with it? It's like, I got to figure this out so then I can deal with it. And it's like, it's already being dealt with. Stop trying to figure it out because you can't know what it is anyway.
Yeah. Right. Like I guess we have this, we don't want to say this, but it's true, but we have this biased way of kind of processing things, right? Like if we're going through emotions, we're like, it's got to be this. Why does it have to be that? Because this is the thing I dwell on. And it's like, could be a bunch of things. Could, in fact, be, dozens and dozens and dozens of contributing factors that you may not even be aware of because you're too busy focusing on that thing. Right. And so we kind of, we narrow down the lessons that we could be learning just by, again, being self-absorbed, being stuck on this narrative of where this is coming from, what it means about me and everything else. And the rest of the time we could be thinking about 100 different reasons that we're feeling this, right? Not looking for it, but because your brain's always processing things. This is the reason that if you're walking down the street not thinking about anything, all of a sudden you'll have an insight and go, holy shit, that's pretty obvious. And why does that happen? Because your brain's always processing things. Like, we're always processing things. You don't have to be in there going, I think we need to process that and that. Because all you're doing now is creating a bottleneck. You're actually making it more difficult to process as much as you were processing otherwise. Right? Because emotions aren't this simplistic cause and effect. This happened, therefore I felt this. It's not that simple. Nothing is. Emotions are very complex. They come from dozens of contributing factors. And so it's really important to recognize that all we're really trying to do, and this is, again, the sad part, because we have a whole fucking industry based on this. Let's just delve into the reasons for that. Let's dig it apart instead of recognizing the fixation on the narrative, right? But this is why I caution people about coping mechanisms. It's like, if you're coping it, you're basically accepting it's always going to be there. Like you can look at the thing, be honest about it, not just cope with it, but actually just look at it and gain strength. Right? Sure, you're going to develop mechanisms for dealing with it as you gain strength. But it's important to not just label them like coping mechanisms. This is what helps me tolerate that, as opposed to this is what I'm using as I work away at that. Right? As that diminishes, or my perspective of that diminishes. Right? This is why it's important to face discomfort, because you start to recognize that it's mostly uncomfortable because you're afraid of it. And that's it. I mean, the discomfort largely goes away with your resistance to that discomfort. It's not to say that things aren't uncomfortable, but you're not grinding up against that. They're only uncomfortable because they're unfamiliar. So uncomfortable changes tone. It's no longer uncomfortable. It's just unfamiliar. Right. And then you're just left with uncertainty. And that's always the case. You're always just left with uncertainty in who you are right now. This is what reality is all about. But we have a very long vested interest in this idea that, no, I need to be thinking about myself in order to be myself. And it's just, again, because the alternative is just letting go, just feeling what you're feeling and recognizing that you're going to think of things as you go. But how do we standardize that? How do we teach other people to do that? It's like, you work on yourself, and then through working on yourself, you inspire change. But this is something I want to say this very quickly, because you were going back. You mentioned earlier, like, it's important to go through the shit, not just to go through it, but to always be aware of it, to always have it there in your considerations of, oh, right, yeah, that could be suffering. Oh, right, yeah, no, I could easily hate myself. Like I could easily get lost in any of these avenues, because that's when you stop judging people who do get lost in those avenues. You know, it's also important to recognize that the only people who have ever inspired you are the people who have gone through shit. You've never been inspired by a person who's done nothing.
Yeah, well said. And it's like this assumption that, you go through shit and then you get to a spot where you don't anymore. Like, that's not what it is. Like, that's not like the even the assumption that discomfort is bad. Like, I think that's a massive one, at least for me. Like, I'm going through something, it's uncomfortable, and therefore it's bad, and therefore I have to figure out ways to get rid of it. Like the coping mechanisms I was talking about earlier. It's like, oh, just meditate, just do this, just do these things, make yourself even like, I, but I was gonna say even like putting yourself, like proving things to yourself, like, oh, I can go through that. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a great way of dealing with discomfort, but it's
Good
not
point.
like it. Yeah. And any of them. It's like discomfort, the feelings, the whatever feelings that you're feeling, like they're never bad things. Like they're never any, like nothing that you experience or feel is ever something that you have to get rid of or overcome. And that, like, fuck. The thought that I go through shit and then I overcome it and then it's gone. It's not something to overcome. Like there is no overcoming of discomfort. Like, we're always changing and shifting and learning new things, and you can't do it without some discomfort. You can't go through anything new. It's like if you avoided your discomfort for your entire life, you would just be in the same spot. Like, you'd just be in a fucking coma, basically. It's like the difference between experience and not. And that's like experience and varying degrees of discomfort go hand in hand. Like, you're going to continue to experience things. You're going to continue to feel discomfort. And so it's not about even overcoming discomfort or making discomfort comfortable. It's just about going through it and going through it and not even having any specific perspective that you feel like you have to maintain about discomfort. It's just the recognition that it's a part of it. It's a component of experience. Like, it's an intrinsic component of being reality itself is the shifts and changes. And how often, you think about like like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. Like, that is so fucking uncomfortable. I can imagine going through a cocoon and like breaking it open. Like even if you just think about that process in and of itself, like the caterpillar is getting too big for its cocoon. Like it's butting up against that. Same with a baby being born, like coming out of the womb. Like, it's just getting too big for its environment. And so there's a massive degree of discomfort right there. And then it comes out changed, like completely and utterly changed. And so the thought that, oh, discomfort, oh, avoid that. Oh, it's like that's oftentimes the precursor to big changes, large degrees of growth. So the thought that it's something to be overcome even is fucking silly. It's like, yeah, when you're dead, that's when you overcome it. You die or you're in a coma. Like, that's when the discomfort ceases. And then it's a whole other, you know, discomfort going into that. But that's a change right there. And so death is a discomfort in the shift of, whatever, which isn't even a shift, because even the thought of death, like what I think I am doesn't die. Well, it's what I think I am that is the only thing that dies, because that's the only thing maintaining my idea that I'm something separate from reality right now, but the thought that the discomfort should ever cease is silly. It ebbs and flows. There's varying degrees of it, but it becomes more of an appreciated thing, not an anticipation for what's to come, but just the recognition that it's a part of the a process, an inherent part of the process.
Whether you understand it or not. That's very much like you mentioned a caterpillar, and I think one of the most interesting things about the caterpillar's journey is that if you were to look at the caterpillar's life up until the point that it goes into its cocoon, quote unquote, you would think that the caterpillar is reckless and completely irresponsible because the caterpillar actually eats itself almost to death. That's how it gets into the cocoon stage, is that it eats itself over and it just keeps eating and eating and eating until it can't move anymore, basically, and then its body starts to change. And so it's actually a self-destructive pattern that leads to something beautiful that the caterpillar wouldn't know is coming. Isn't that interesting? So when you start looking at humanity, you start looking at yourself, you're like, oh, all those terrible habits. Oh, I was so self-destructive. It's like, yeah, and that's how you're becoming more of what you are. That's how change happens. Right. But we can't see that while we're going through it. We never can. This is why I was saying about inspiring people. Like when those people were going through the shit, having problems paying bills or struggling with cancer or struggling with losing their family or going through the Holocaust or whatever it was, they didn't feel like they were inspiring anyone. They didn't feel inspirational. Understand, these people felt like shit. It was hard. They didn't think they'd make it. They went through all the same shit that you're going through. And yet, generations later, years later, from an outside perspective, we're like, they were so strong. They didn't feel that way. That's what makes them strong, right? It's the fact that we didn't feel that way and we went through it anyway. It wouldn't be courage if you didn't feel fear.
Yeah. Well said. Oh my God. Like how often we go through things and it's like, there's things happening here. You don't know what they are. Stop trying to figure it out today. Like, even the thought of figuring out something that you're going through over a span of, plays out over time, thinking that you can know it as it's happening. It's like things start to shift. And even the thought of that anything that comes of anything, there's never not a process of discomfort there. Totally shifts your perspective of the discomfort. It's not something that's as scary anymore. It's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm learning shit. It's uncomfortable as fuck right now. I'm not thoroughly enjoying it necessarily, but there are things happening here. I don't know what they are, and as long as I just keep going, as long as I just keep going, things will play out. Like, there's more shit to be learned, and it's the ebbs and flows, like the necessary ebbs and flows, and how funny it is that we can, in states of clarity, like, realize that, like, oh yeah, life ebbs and flows. Don't resist the lows; it'll make it. Just prolong them. And when you see the necessity of them, it makes it more difficult to necessarily keep trying to avoid and fight them, and it almost immediately shifts at least a component of it, not the thing itself. Like, it's still uncomfortable, or there's still discomfort there, but it's not, when there isn't so much of the idea that it shouldn't be happening, it's like it immediately changes it, in a sense. Like, it's an absolutely necessary component, but the other side of it is, like, you can't know where it's going, but it's going somewhere. Like, change is what you are, and so the thought that you're not changing right now is silly, but that's what I can convince myself of, is that I'm not changing right now. I'm actually changing in the sense that I'm reverting back to, years and years and years, despite it not being the case, like, I don't know what's happening. Things are just changing. They're just changing. It's not comfortable. And even the thought of that, it's like, I don't even know what the fuck is I'm talking. Like, I don't know what discomfort is, a thing that I don't want to be happening. It's like, okay, well, if I let go of the idea that the discomfort shouldn't be happening, if I recognize it as a necessary component of my experience, of my growth, of my, learning pattern as a whole, of the collective learning pattern, then it doesn't have the same twang of discomfort in the sense in that way, that it's like I can't actually with certainty say that it's uncomfortable. It's just something that I'm going through, and it doesn't have the same sort of, I don't know, negative, resistant vibe to it. It's like, yeah, it's something. It's something that's happening. And I don't know what it is.
But our perspective of life really does change things. Like, just give you an example. Nobody who goes to a gym is surprised to find weights. And yet we go into life surprised to find discomfort. Like, life itself isn't the process of growth. Right. So it really is just our perspective of the environment. It is our perspective of what life is all about. And we have this unfortunate Christian perspective is life is suffering. It's like, that's not quite the case. Life is change. Your resistance to change equals suffering. But life is change, right? And if you're going into your life day to day expecting, or trying to shoot for a period of stagnation, a period of comfort, a period where nothing's changing, where you are the same thing all the time, you are going to suffer because life is change. In the same way that if you went to the gym and somebody handed you a weight and you didn't expect it, you'd be like, why are you doing this? It's because you're at a gym. People are going to hand you weights, right? You're living. Shit's going to change. Don't be surprised, right? Because the more you're surprised, the more you're complaining about it, the harder it is to deal with.
Yeah. Even that, just it's so funny how I can maintain this idea that like discomfort shouldn't be happening. Like that something that's happening shouldn't be. Like, now life involves all components of the spectrum, like every end and every side of the spectrum. So to think that there are things that shouldn't be happening and that I know they shouldn't be happening, that I know that I shouldn't be going through them, because that's the assumption that I've been making. If there are certain things, feelings, experiences, whatever, that I shouldn't be experiencing. And it's such a assumptive, such a massive assumption to make. And it is, it's a great example. It's like, yeah, like anything, going to a hockey game and being surprised to see pucks, going to the gym, being surprised to see weights, going to a basketball court and being surprised to see basketballs. It's like, when you put it like that, it's like, to expect life to not have discomfort is just ridiculous. And that discomfort's going to come in varying forms, but it's going to be less comfortable the more that you think that it shouldn't be happening, the more that you think that it shouldn't be a component of life, because the discomfort and the change go hand in hand. Like, change can't happen without discomfort. Like, it doesn't happen without it. And so if change is the only constant, then varying degrees of discomfort is going to be the constant, but it doesn't have to hold a weight. Like, there's a discomfort when you're in bed and it's nice and warm and the covers are warm and you're feeling good. Like, there's a discomfort in getting out of bed. Like, that is a degree of discomfort. Anything, you go outside and it's cooler in your house, you got the AC on, and then it's warmer outside. It's like, that is a change in your environment. There is a degree of discomfort, but it doesn't get exacerbated because you know that it's coming and you know that it's vital and necessary. Like, you can't shift You can't go from inside to outside without experiencing a shift in the environment. And that is a degree of discomfort. And so, but I wouldn't even think of it as discomfort at all, but it is. And it's only because I don't think that it shouldn't be happening. That's why it doesn't hold the same weight. But that's everything that we go through. Constantly shifting. Everything's shifting all the time. And it's only the times where it's things that I think shouldn't be happening that it feels heavy. It's like, oh, this feels really uncomfortable. It's like, that's always there because everything's always changing all the time. And it's just the parts where you think it shouldn't be, where you're like, oh, I wanted things to stay as they are. Why? Because I felt more sure and certain about it and felt more comfortable. Well, it's going to keep happening. So, you can either keep riding or keep fighting, but there's going to be consequences to the fighting, and there's going to be consequences to the not fighting. Like, consequences not in the negative sense, but just in that there is going to be changes that happen. It's like, buckle up, keep riding it, do your best, pay as much attention as you can as you're going through it, because that's what allows you to then learn the lessons so that it doesn't have to keep coming up. The same sort of change doesn't have to keep coming up, but at the same time, it's never the same change. So it's just your avoidance of the reality of change and the feelings that come with it. And the discomfort gets more intense the more you fight it. The more I fight it, the more I think that it shouldn't be happening, but it's constant. Like, it's always changing. You got to go to the bathroom. That's a discomfort right there. And then you go to the bathroom and the discomfort isn't there as much. And then that's like, everything is on a scale of that constant change happening. But you don't think of certain things as uncomfortable. It's like, you got to pee really bad. You're holding it in the car. You're on a car ride and, there's not a bathroom for 30 minutes. Like, that's an uncomfortable situation right there. But there's also, because you've gone through it a number of times, the recognition that that's going to change also. That discomfort, that intense discomfort that you're feeling right now, is going to change also. But there's certain things that we don't maintain that perspective for. And then we get all bottled up and all tightened up and all tense about it. It's like, oh, maybe this is going to last forever. It's like, it's not. Nothing does. It never does, because it's always changing. And it's like almost the thought that it might, that it could, that keeps us there, that keeps us from changing. And it's like, our avoidance of change is the most uncomfortable thing we can go through. It's like, either allow things to keep changing and experience that discomfort, or fight the change that's happening and feel more discomfort. It's like, well, whatever you want to do, there's no right or wrong answer, but there is an ease to allowing it to keep happening and not make the assumption that it's not going to keep happening. It's like, change has always been the constant. Why do you think that this isn't going to change right now?
Because we've had control previously. This is kind of the cost of intelligence, right? Like, that's why I love history. God, I love history. I love the progression of events that led us to where we are now, as it were. Just because we talk about accepting change, and if you go back far enough, like, there was a period of time where you went for a walk in the woods, something was likely going to try and eat you, right? And so that was a good reason to be afraid. In uncertainty, things that were in that uncertainty might eat you. And so humans, being as intelligent as we are, developed ways to hold off those things that want to eat us. We developed ways to hold off the things that we're afraid of, like hold off the darkness with light, hold off animals with spears and weapons, hold off our enemies with walls. And so, because of our intelligence, we are able to influence our physical reality. But we make the mistake of thinking that just because we can come up with a clever way to hold off the things that we're afraid of, that we can hold off fear itself. And we make the mistake of thinking that control is possible outside of influence over the external being possible. And even that's not control. If it was, infrastructure would never crumble. Right? So control is not possible. It's just temporary influence. And we have that unfortunate that unfortunate idea that no, we have control. Doesn't matter how many empires come and go, how many times we do something and it crumbles. No, we have control. And this is why I love that poem about the wanderer going through the desert, and he comes across the foot of what was once this massive statue. There's nothing left of the city that surrounded it, nothing left of the statue itself, just broken pieces. And at the foot, at the base of the statue, it says, "Tremble, ye mighty, at my works and despair." And that's the funniest part, is that time doesn't give a shit about your ego, right? Time doesn't care about what you think you control. It all just gets washed away, right? But we really do think that we have control, and so we think we can control everything that we feel. We think that we can hold off fear and unhappiness and disappointment. We think that we can do all that. We can control our way to absolute continuous satisfaction all the time, not realizing that the need to do so is what's creating the fear that actually makes our life worse. So it's a tricky balance to recognize that while we are intelligent, we don't have control. While we have influence, we don't have control. And that realization would change everything, right down to how we interact with nature, right? We would change the way that we do logging, for example. Selective logging is a way better way of using forest products, because you're not cutting down the whole goddamn forest. You're looking at trees that specifically have served their purpose and are now on their way out, right? You're not just clear cutting. You're looking at nature and going, okay, how do we influence this in a way that's beneficial without just raping it to benefit ourselves? Not recognizing that in the long term, we're diminishing all of the plant life on the planet, the quality of the air, we're changing the weather patterns, we're doing all of this, as well as the impact we have on nature itself, the other animals and species, and the impact that we have on natural foods and potentially medicines that we could be researching. Because again, we find the majority of our medicines in forests. So if we're cutting down all those forests, there's going to be a lot less diversity, and it gives us a lot less opportunity to find new things that could be beneficial.
Yeah, that example of selective logging kind of made me think of just going through overarching uncomfortable situations, and like, as we label it as something, as we think, oh, I'm going through something, it's similar to rape in the forest, just clear cutting everything. Whereas when you recognize that just because you're experiencing what seems like a constant discomfort doesn't mean there aren't bits and pieces, experiences during that discomfort that you have influence over. There are little things to learn along the way, like recognizing, certain trees that are ready to go. And there's certain situations, even when you're uncomfortable, that actually could be better informed by you being uncomfortable as opposed to you being super fucking clear and feeling amazing and feeling really good yourself. Like there are certain situations where it's easier to connect with someone as you're going through something, as opposed to having gone through it already. So there's always the opportunities, and you realize there's a benefit to going through something, even directly, even while you're in the shit or dealing with a really uncomfortable spot in your life. Like, you keep doing stuff, there's actually a better, like, you can have possibly more influence over certain situations than you would because you're closer to them. Like, you know them better almost because you're in it in that moment. Whereas, you get through something and then you speak on it after the fact, or talk about it after the fact, or talk to someone, and you're like, oh yeah, I was going through that. It's like, there's a difference in, oh, I'm going through that, or, oh, I've been through that. Like, and so recognizing that as you're going through something, it's you're more sensitive to, if you can maintain a sensitivity to your environment, to your experience as you're going through the shit. It's like, there could actually be the potential for more influence than you have when you're not going through it and kind of just keeping the cerebral idea of what it feels like to be in that. And even just that interconnectivity of that, like the number of times that someone I've, looked up to talked about how they feel like shit sometimes, or go through stuff and deal with things, deal with certain feelings. And just them sharing that, I was like, oh shit, they go through that too. They deal with that too. And that made way more of an impact on me than someone talking about, tips for this or tips for that, or do this, or here's some advice on this. Just being willing to admit, yeah, I go through shit too. Yeah, I deal with stuff too. Yeah, I get worked up and overly concerned about what people think of me too. I go through bouts of fear and self-judgment and self-criticism and blah, 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 blah all the time. And so when you're in that, it's like they're even just being willing to talk about it or keep doing things as you're going through it. It's like that in and of itself could have more impact. And not to say that you're fucking, or my goal is to have all of this impact, but there is a recognition in that there is a benefit to being in the shit or feeling a lot of what you perceived as overwhelming discomfort in the moment. So it's not just this thing that shouldn't be happening. It's like, no, there's a lot of things that there's actually benefits to it that are more beneficial when you're in this spot than when you're not. Like, there are actually situations where you may have more influence in because you're currently feeling it, and talking from that spot as opposed to a spot where, like, oh yeah, I'm not going through it. And so to your earlier point that you don't have to look directly at them all the time and try and figure them out. It's like, oh yeah, I'm feeling a lot right now, but I'm not maintaining this perspective that they shouldn't be happening. So you can be in the shit, but not really be in the shit, and then actually keep living your life and doing things and sharing things and still be feeling all this stuff, but not overwhelmed by it where it like takes you out and you're fucking sitting in your room sulking for a week straight. Something. You can still do what you can do during it and actually have more influence in a lot of ways than when you're not feeling like you're in a pit.
I just want to comment quickly. This is something that's changed for me over the last, I don't know, 5 years or so. I used to spend so much time trying to figure out how to get through to someone or how to figure out, what the right thing was to do. How am I supposed to be there for this person? What is it that they're going through? How do I empathize? I would exercise all of this intellectual ability. And that's, that's useful to a point. But what I find now is I'll just give myself a little bit of time. Like, I'll just give myself some time. I'll go for a walk and all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, fuck, that's what they're going through. Or at least that's part of it. And it's something that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise because I'm thinking about it through my own fears and preferences, right? So until I actually just let it process, it's actually very difficult to have the same number of insights I would have otherwise. We're far more intuitive than we think we are, but that's the problem, is that we're thinking, which is causing the lack of intuition, right? We're deliberately fucking up the flow because we're afraid that it wouldn't do what it's doing otherwise. I always find that funny. I still find it hilarious that we don't think that we're growing unless we're tracking our progress. If we're not tracking that progress, it's not happening. It's kind of a funny mentality, but it's important to laugh at all these things. And that's going to be something we're going to discuss a little bit more in the Patreon call after this, as well as in the follow-up episode that we're going to be doing at 4 p.m. Eastern today.
Sounds
Andrew's giving me the nod. Yes, 4 p.m. Eastern today. If you can join us back here, twitch.tv/Dualistic Unity. You can also watch it on YouTube live. We publish all of these after the fact. This is going to be Dualistic Unity Raw episode 91. We're getting real close to that 100 mark.
Fuck yeah. Actually, would you be free to do 3 Eastern time? By chance?
I would be.
Okay, cool. Let's do that. All right, awesome. Yeah, I'm excited, but it's funny how sometimes these calls are like feel like a therapy session or a release or even just talking through shit. And I mean, yeah, that's what a lot of our Patreon groups feel like too. But yeah, it's interesting. Fucking life experience. Perspectives, assumptions about fucking.
You need to know, and this is the thing, like we're people think I'm passing along nuggets of fucking wisdom. Really what I'm passing along is the fact that you can have this mentality, this state of mind where you're just aware and uncertain, and it doesn't tear you down. Andrew knows from talking to me about shit I'm going through in my own life. I'm really like this, regardless of the pressure. I'm really like this regardless of what's happening. And it's because I've learned that I can be. It's not through avoidance, it's actually through facing it, looking at it, fucking dancing on it, right? But it's recognizing that it doesn't do you any good to ruin your own time. You're still what is. You may as well just treat it lightly. You'd be surprised how quickly it changes for you, and how much it can be just a source of joy once you stop resisting it. Once you stop trying to pin it down and you just let go, you will discover everything that you've been looking for and can't achieve through thought. This has been a blast. We're going to end this here. We're going to continue on patreon.com/dualistic unity. Join us for an hour call. It's a tier 1 call today. It's only $5 a month. There's also a 7-day free trial. This is our last day of the week until our Vermont retreat. So we'll be back next Wednesday for a free public group that you can register at dualisticulunity.com to join.